For 15 centuries, classical Sanskrit literature has been defined by one author. His poetry and plays are so foundational to Indian culture that he is often introduced to the world as the Shakespeare of India. Popular legend, however, offers a different starting point. It portrays this literary giant as an illiterate shepherd who only entered the world of the elite when he was tricked into marrying a learned princess. According to the story, the banished shepherd was blessed by the goddess Kali. He emerged from the temple as Kalidasa, her servant, suddenly possessed of a genius that would reshape Indian letters. This narrative of a sudden, magical transformation sits in tension with the reality of his work. The technical demands of 5th century court poetry required an education that took a lifetime to acquire. To find the historical man, we have to look past the folk stories and analyze the internal evidence of the only surviving records, the texts themselves. By cross-referencing his descriptions with known history, scholars place him in the 4th or 5th century CE. This was the era of the Gupta Empire, likely during the reign of King Chandragupta II. This gold coin from the Gupta period shows the level of material wealth and artistic detail that defined Kalidasa's world. It was a society that prized high-level craftsmanship and intellectual rigor. Since Kalidasa left no autobiography, researchers map the specific landmarks and environments mentioned in his poems to theorize where he might have been born. The Kashmir theory highlights his intimate familiarity with the Himalayas. He writes with high precision about saffron cultivation, musk deer, and local northern legends that were largely unknown in the rest of India. However, historian V.V. Marashi points to the city of Ujjain. In his poem Meghaduta, Kalidasa describes Ujjain with a level of joy and detail far exceeding any other city, even urging a passing cloud to take a long detour just to see its beauty. The breadth of these descriptions suggests a writer who had traveled extensively across the subcontinent, possessing an education and a level of mobility that mirrors the life of a high-ranking courtier. Beyond his biography, his technical ability reveals a sophisticated understanding of language, specifically his mastery of upama, or the complex simile. This is a visualization of the Mandakranta meter. It is a slow, rhythmic arrangement of syllables designed to create lyrical sweetness. This rhythm mimics the heavy, lingering longing of a lover sending a message via a drifting cloud. His plays, particularly Sakuntala, show this same attention to structure, moving from technical mastery of language to a deep exploration of human psychology and moral conflict. He built the play's tension around a complex curse, a memory loss that can only be cured by the return of a specific royal ring, a mechanism that forces the characters to grapple with fate and recognition. These intricate plot structures and psychological depth indicate a mind trained in the traditions of drama, suggesting his talent was built on a foundation of lifelong study. That talent eventually traveled far beyond India. In the late 18th century, the translation of Sakuntala into English and German marked one of the first times Indian literature reached a European audience. The reaction was immediate. The German poet Gupta was so moved by the work that he wrote a tribute claiming the play combined the blossoms of youth and the fruits of maturity in a single name. By the late 19th century, his characters were taking physical form in European art, inspiring sculptures that translated his poetic romanticism into stone and bronze. His influence reached the world of music as well. In 1910, the English composer Gustav Holst used The Cloud Messenger as the basis for a large-scale choral work. His legacy also returned home to inspire modern India. The monsoon poetry of Rabindranath Tagore carries the same romantic resonance found in the verses Kalidasa wrote over a millennium earlier. Whether he was a blessed shepherd, a traveling courtier, or a name shared by multiple poets, his true identity is preserved in his writing. He remains a timeless architect of emotion, whose work bridged the ancient and modern worlds.
Hello and welcome. Today we are jumping into the world of a name that is just legendary in literature, Kalidasa. We're talking about a true titan of classical Sanskrit, a poet and playwright whose genius is completely off the charts. But the man himself, well, he's basically a ghost.
Okay, so let's just start with how big of a deal this guy is. When 19th century scholars like Sir Monier Williams came across his work, they didn't just say, oh, he's a great Indian poet. No. They reached for the biggest name they could think of, Shakespeare. The Shakespeare of India. I mean, that tells you the level of mastery we're talking about here. A deep, profound understanding of what makes us human, all wrapped up in unbelievable poetry.
And that right there, that's the heart of the mystery, isn't it? For someone so incredibly famous, we know almost nothing for certain about his life. Seriously, his story isn't some neat biography. It's more like a historical cold case. We have to piece it together from little clues, a ton of debate, and the words he left behind. So let's put on our detective hats and follow the trail.
First things first, when did he even live? Trying to pin Kalidasa down on a timeline is, let's just say, a huge challenge. There are no diaries, no letters, no one who wrote about meeting him. All we have are a few hints and the style of his writing.
Now, check this out, because the possibilities are pretty wild. You've got these old legends connecting him to a king Vikramaditya way back in the 1st century BCE. But that king probably wasn't a real historical person. The theory that most scholars agree on puts him in the 4th to 5th century CE. This was the golden age of the Gupta Empire, ruled by a king named Chandragupta II. And this time frame fits with actual physical evidence, like a 473 CE inscription that seems to be directly copying his poetic style. So the main takeaway is we are most likely talking about a poet who was at his peak over 1,500 years ago, right at the height of classical Indian civilization.
Okay, so we've got a rough time frame, but where was he from? This question has sparked some really intense arguments all across India, with experts digging through his poems, line by line, looking for any geographical clues.
And you can see how the poems themselves fuel the two biggest theories. The argument for Ujjaini in central India is all about his passionate, almost loving descriptions of the city in his poem, The Cloud Messenger. One scholar, V.V. Marashi, said that Kalidasa writes about Ujjaini with this deep admiration and love you don't see for other places. But then you've got the case for Kashmir. People on this side point to his super detailed knowledge of Himalayan plants and animals. Saffron, deodar trees, musk deer. I mean, these are things you'd only know if you live there, right? The debate is fierce, and both sides are using the poet's own words as their best evidence.
And believe me, it doesn't stop there. So many places want to claim Kalidasa that you've got villages in Bengal, Bihar, and Uttarakhand, and they all have their own local legends tying him to their home turf. It just goes to show you how his legacy became so huge that he's become part of the very fabric of India itself.
This brings us to an even crazier question. We've been saying Kalidasa this whole time like he was one guy. But what if he wasn't?
Yeah, this is another one of those puzzles scholars love to debate. Most people think a single genius wrote the main works because the poetic style is so consistent. But there's another idea out there. See, ancient writers like Raja Shekhara hinted that there were actually 3 different famous poets named Kalidasa. And over the centuries, so many other lesser works got wrongly attached to his name that Kalidasa basically became a brand, like a seal of poetic quality. Some even think it just became a title for any great court poet.
So, when you look at the historical file on Kalidasa, it's just full of question marks and theories. But now, let's stop searching for the man we can't find and turn to the masterpieces we can't forget. Because here, the evidence is crystal clear.
Kalidasa's work that has survived to this day includes plays and poems that have been held up for centuries as the absolute peak of Sanskrit literature.
We have 3 of his plays. Malavikaghnitram and Vikramarvasyam are these amazing love stories. But his absolute masterpiece, his magnum opus, is Abhijnanasakuntalam, which translates to The Recognition of Shakuntala. It is this epic romance between a king and a girl from the forest, and it's just packed with emotional depth, love, memory, loss, and finally, reunion. And his poetic skill was just as incredible. He wrote these huge, sweeping epics called Mahakavya, like the Raghavamsha, which tells the story of an entire royal dynasty. But then, he could also write these deeply personal, lyrical poems called Khandakavya. The most famous is Meghaduta, or The Cloud Messenger, where a banished husband basically asks a passing cloud to carry a message to his wife. For more than 1,000 years, these works were treasures, known mainly within the Sanskrit-speaking world. But then, in the 18th century, they just exploded onto the world stage, and it was a total phenomenon. Let's just follow the journey of his most famous play. After a man named Sir William Jones translated Shakuntala into English in 1791, it eventually found its way to Germany. And there, it completely blew the minds of the leading thinkers of the European Romantic movement. That's a quote from the legendary German poet Goethe, and his reaction was just total awe. You see, for the Romantics, who are all about raw emotion and the power of nature, Shakuntala was like a revelation. Goethe saw it as this perfect blend of the passion of youth and the wisdom of age, of heaven and earth. And getting that kind of praise from a guy like Goethe, that's what cemented Kalidasa's place in world literature, for good.
And that influence wasn't just in books. The powerful universal themes in Kalidasa's stories started inspiring artists all over the world. The French sculptor Camille Claudel created her famous sculpture Sakuntala in 1886, capturing all that raw passion. The English composer Gustav Holst actually set the cloud messenger to music. And of course, the plays have been turned into countless films, bringing these ancient stories to all of us today.
So, you see, we might never know for sure who Kalidasa was, or where he lived, or if he was even one person. But the verdict on the power of his art, that's been handed down again and again across every culture and every century. It's unanimous.
So what is it? What's the secret to his timeless appeal? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is in this famous Sanskrit phrase, Upama Kalidasasya. It roughly translates to Kalidasa owns the simile. It means he was an absolute master of comparison. He wouldn't just say a character is sad. No, he would describe a lone flower drooping after a storm, and that image would perfectly mirror the character's inner heartbreak. For him, nature was a language for the soul.
And in the end, that's why we still read him, isn't it? His stories about love and duty and loss and nature, they connect with us because they tap into something universal. We can see ourselves in his characters, whether they lived in a mythical forest or a palace in the heavens.
Which leaves us with just one last thing to think about. The mystery of the man himself might never be solved. But when a body of work is so powerful that it can travel across continents, inspire masterpieces in totally different art forms, and speak directly to what makes us all human, maybe the art itself is the only identity that really matters.